This is going to be a podcast, so put this on your second screen, put on your favorite music, and let's talk about fluids in Satisfactory. I made 2 videos on this topic so far, and the response from all of you has been just astonishing. Thank you very much for that. Today I'm going to respond to your comments on the fluid byproducts video. I have other things that I want to talk about in the future, so this will be an attempt at closing the book on fluid management for now. I've plugged about 24 comments from the YouTube video as well as the Reddit thread, and I will start with the questions on fluids before moving on to more random stuff. First up, alternative solutions. In the video I discussed 4 designs for fluid byproducts: the VIP junction, head lift reset, just a valve, and Mergeless. But there are other options. YouTube user Sergeant Sabotage writes, "I've tried many things to deal with byproduct water in aluminum production. The most reliable method I've found is sinking wet concrete." Yeah, I noticed in editing that I forgot to mention this method, so I put it in the video description, but most people don't read those, myself included. What Sergeant Sabotage is saying is that they don't try to reuse byproduct water for the same process, instead they send it somewhere else to produce other items. Wet concrete specifically is an alternate recipe where instead of turning limestone into concrete directly, you mix it with water to get a better yield. The main point here is that concrete is an item, not a fluid, so it can be discarded in an awesome sink. Or alternatively, you can use it as building material or a pre-product. Wet concrete is the classic choice because limestone nodes are so abundant, there's always going to be one close to where you're building. If you have a coal node nearby, another popular option is to put down some coal generators and suck up the water to produce power. Speaking of options, here's another option that sounds attractive. YouTube user PowerPoint Gaming writes, "Just dump it into a nearby water supply." Yeah, that would be nice, but alas, the game does not allow that. If you build a pipeline straight down and point it at a lake, nothing will come out of it. Pipelines can only output into machines or junction crosses. That's the reason we're having this entire discussion in the first place. Sorry. YouTube user Salamander BSC provides a slightly more involved suggestion, a so-called priority merger. This one is based around packaging. By turning fluid water into packaged water, it becomes an item, and then we can apply the entire range of conveyor belt tricks. Since this is a bit more involved, I'll show you a quick recreation of this design in-game for demonstration purposes. With packages, I could use a priority merger, stack both lines on top of each other, put splitters all over the priority line, and connect both sides to mergers on the input line with lifts. Gets close to 99.9% of just using the priority line at 6 splitters. And sinking the 0.1% rounding error coming out of the end of the priority line. Quick aside from the editing department. This example build uses regular splitters, but Salamander BSC probably referred to smart splitters. When using smart splitters with their main output pointing down to the mergers and an overflow output pointing forward to the next splitter, the leakage into the sink output will be much lower than shown here. So, that sounds like a fun idea. I haven't actually tried to run it, and it sounds like kind of a lot of legwork for when a junction cross with valves or a junction cross with a fluid buffer would also work. But as I said in the video, if you want to go wild with your production line designs, I respect that. To round out this section, there's one more proposed design on my list, and it has quite a few parts, so I'll put a diagram on screen as I'm reading this. YouTube user Veradic0 writes, "Just have one water extractor feed into a junction from below, feed to refineries from the sides via pumps that have enough head lift, and let the recycled water fall in from the top. As long as the refineries are high enough above the junction, the virgin water source can't fill up the pipe coming down from the top, but the inputs are kept full. The system never gets deadlocked and has instant recovery when the solids are moving again." This ends up working similar to head lift reset, but using verticality instead of an unpowered pump to achieve a head lift difference. So maybe it's an archetypal, prototypical form of head lift reset? It certainly feels more intuitive than using an unpowered pump. And speaking of intuitive, let's continue with the exact opposite of that and talk about the VIP junction. I got a lot of comments on how to fix my build, but I'm going to lead with a comment from the original designer themselves. Reddit user McGalleon writes, "To be perfectly honest, the VIP isn't my favorite either. That's why it's mentioned as a footnote on the actual page that talks about recycling fluids. The boring method of mergeless dedicated recycling refineries is actually my favorite solution. As to why there's not much documentation on how or why the VIP works, it's because I do not know how or why it works. I discovered the design one day when playing around, but have not been able to describe why they work. They are my most hated creation because they are an enigma and unintuitive. So this test does put them in the deserved place." Wow. So I appreciate all of you try to help me fix my build, and I did ask for that. But if that's what the original creator thinks about them, maybe let's just say that the VIP junction is a dead meme and let's move on. But first, before we discuss the other designs, a comment on the plumbing manual itself. YouTube user Slava Konishev writes, "Man, that guide is unreadable, pretentious, teaching abusing game mechanics. It basically sucks. I mean, yeah, to some extent, but I don't think that's fair. I was not around when the plumbing manual was written, but looking at it, I recognize this kind of writing, this kind of structure. If you work in IT operations like I do, you may have come across internal documentation that goes like, when this thing happens, go there, put in this command, press that button, and hopefully that fixes things. And that's how it grows. Slowly, over time, learned lessons from each incident pile up on top of each other and form a cobweb of tangentially related thoughts. The plumbing manual looks just like that. Maybe when 1.0 comes out, someone will come and clean it up and make a new version of the plumbing manual. Here's hoping. But for now, we're going to move on to the head lift reset design. YouTube user SnakeJaws writes, in the head lift reset design, you can use a small fluid buffer lifted on a 4-meter foundation to increase the head height. This will save on space. I was going to answer this, but someone else did my work for me. Jumping back to Reddit and to the source of this design, Jinky Rain writes, I ran into test cases where even a regular fluid buffer elevated by 4 meters was getting overwhelmed by sloshing and unpowered pump leakage. The larger volume of the industrial fluid buffer seemed a little more immune to this problem. For what it's worth, there's no need for a fluid buffer at all really. One could just run a dead-end pipe up the side of a wall 12 to 16 meters, and as long as it topped out above the head lift of the byproduct refineries, the top would remain empty while the rest stayed full enough to keep the unpowered pump quiet. There you go. They did my job for me. Let's move on. About the just a valve design, Reddit user Vivaka writes, the trick is opening the valve more than the amount of recovered water should be and restricting fresh water intake slightly below what it should need. This is very unscientific, I understand, but it does not take a lot of constant tweaking to get it dialed in. Set it as I described, then come back later and see how it's doing, and alter both to further restrict one while opening the other. I don't even use buffers on these lines. Let's use an example to clarify this. On my test setup, I had 240 cubic meters per minute of fresh water and 360 of byproduct water. Instead of 240 on the fresh water, we would allow slightly less, so 235 or 230. And appropriately, instead of 360 on the byproduct water, we would allow slightly more, so 365 or 370. That'll end up being closer to what we actually want than just putting in the quote-unquote real numbers. So there appears to be some weird stuff going on with accuracy. And indeed, I have another comment from YouTube user RealQuaker3488 who says, as far as I understand, the problem with valves is that their real throughput is not always what it shows on the display, but somewhere around that value. According to the wiki page, the valve operates on a set of predefined values rather than the values set by the player. It is possible that in your test you accidentally hit one of the round values, or there simply was not enough time for that fraction error to clock the output. That is entirely possible, particularly for the endurance challenges. 2 hours is quite long, but also quite short for a game where single saves can rack up hundreds and thousands of hours. I just did not want to leave my PC running for days on end and wasting tons of power just for this test. On the topic of Mergeless, YouTube user BL2575 writes, I've been using what you call Mergeless since the very first release. In my opinion, the advantage of this approach is that it doesn't rely on the implementation details that may change as they keep optimizing the game. And that leads directly into the upcoming release, as YouTube user ScottTheLen489 writes, sadly, this knowledge might become useless once 1.0 releases and pipes and fluids will function slightly differently. It's very likely. There will be changes to how pipeline networks are represented in the simulation, and that will for sure have knock-on effects on fluid behavior. Maybe when these changes have come and gone and we all had time to familiarize ourselves with the new reality, maybe do a bit of research, I may revisit this topic in a year or so, just to see how the old videos are holding up and how my advice might have changed since then. But as I said, for now I'm done with fluids. Just one more quick thing, from YouTube user ZGDH3647. I have some concerns with your testing methods. Your downtime was way too short to make the dangerous flaw of the valve apparent. If the input is only missing for a short amount of time, that'll be fine. However, if you've got longer delays and or chronic ones, for example via not constant train input, then there will be an issue in the long run. As soon as the demand drops, you introduce the set amount of extra water into the system every second. Sure, these pipes can hold a lot of water, but that just moves the point of failure farther into the future, making a random or unexpected failure event possible in the first place. That is an entirely valid concern, but if you go to my second channel and look at the raw footage, link over here, you will see that for the missing input and clogged output challenges, I cut off the input and output respectively, and then you can see me waiting until absolutely everything in the production line stops. So all the pipelines are running full, and I wait not just a random amount of time or until some individual buffer is full, but I wait until the water extractors all shut off because even their internal buffers are full. So this was all accounted for. Going into more general comments, YouTube user Evan Ruskar writes, your Satisfactory world is astonishingly organized. You must have a very disciplined way of playing the game. I'd love to see more of it. Maybe a let's play? I do in fact have a Twitch channel on which I stream regularly, but that's my weekly time slot for playing new games that I otherwise wouldn't, so platformers, puzzle games, Metroidvanias, that kind of stuff. Not a lot of building games. Satisfactory is actually more of a mindless game for me, so maybe similar to Stardew Valley or Animal Crossing for other people. Like sure, I have to devise a plan of what I want to build and figure out the right dimensions and layout, but then it's just a lot of placing buildings and connecting a billion belts and pipelines. Just the right thing for when I want to be no thoughts head empty, which really ain't the right headspace for a stream, at least for me. However, there's one Let's Play of Satisfactory on YouTube that involves me. It's on Kello Maife's channel. She's the lady who you saw in the video being concerned about me bringing out the whiteboard. I requested her to play Satisfactory a while back, and for part 1 we were in co-op and I mentored her through the tutorial. I'll put a link here if you want to check that out. On the topic of building, YouTube user Blocks5140 writes, I was curious if you'd be willing to explain your strategy for train logistics in more detail. I'm working on preparing my strategy for my 1.0 save, and I looked at your save and was curious how you divide up resources collected and produced in large quantities in one location out to several receiving factories. I was actually pondering to have a central distribution hub where resources get shuffled around between branches. Like that would have been neat, but it did not really come up. The devs have done a really good job of spreading out ores rather evenly across the map, so there's not much need to ferry raw materials around the entire map. So whenever I think of building a logistics hub, that place may just as well be final assembly for all the high tier items. And speaking of high tier items, YouTube user Redacted9606 writes, I saw the manual. At that point, why don't you just get a chemical engineering degree? Holy shit. Not chemical engineering, but way ahead of you on this one. And this is a neat segue into the topic of cutaway gags. YouTube user Christini writes, oh dear, is he gonna bring out the whiteboard again? For this we're gonna bring out the whiteboard again. I laughed a little too loud. I put this in so I can talk about a lesson that I learned with this video. Because every time I put a video on the channel, I try to do something that I have not done before. The Mega Factory video was the first time I edited a video at all. Fluid management was my first live action shoots with the whiteboard. This time is the first time I'm using a teleprompter. And Fluid byproducts was the first outdoor shoot. And also the first time I wrote lines for other people. And that went terribly on my part, because as you can see on screen here, I sent them literally the words that they were supposed to say within context, but with no direction at all. Apparently I just didn't realize that people don't know how the line sounds like in my head, that there might be different reads. And shout out to both Kello and Fern, they were both very professional about it and sent me multiple variations that I could choose from, but that's definitely a lesson learned on my part for next time. Since this comment is about one of my cutaway gags, I will also say lots of people commented on my comedy writing, and the best word to summarize it is divisive. That's something that I'm aware of. My jokes are divisive within my friend group as well. And the thing is, I'll keep doing it, because besides serving as comic relief, it makes all of this seem fun and not like work for me, even though objectively it is a lot of work. Another thing that was a cutaway but not a gag was the traveling montage. YouTube user Can I Get 12 writes, as an American that has never used public transportation, I laughed when I saw the bus was a Mercedes. It's a weird coincidence that there's an entire running joke in the video about me proposing wild things to do and there's no budget for it, but then I get into a fully electric Mercedes and I don't even bring it up. What this teaches us is that the only budget that I need is for a D-ticket. Look it up. Continuing on the topic of production, YouTube user Iscatel1726 writes, holy, dude literally edited Satisfactory video like it's some TV show on National Geographic. There were lots of comments on production quality. Thank you for your kind words, but I think the style that I've adopted comes mostly from production constraints. Topical example, the shot might be slightly different right now because the camera was overheating and I had to put it in the fridge for like 10 minutes before continuing to shoot. So that's the thing that happened. Another example, I have no skills of drawing motion graphics. I don't even know where to begin about this. So what I do is to hold the camera still in game and then take a screenshot from that, paint over that in Inkscape, and I put that drawing back into the video editor with just simple transitions. So a lot of what comes across as style is just me trying to make as good a product as possible within my practical constraints. And speaking of the practicalities of video editing, YouTube user FeridDev writes, did I finally just find someone else that uses Blender for editing? Yes. When I looked for which video editor to use, I saw that Blender has one, and Blender has a good reputation in general, so I checked it out. And although it is a bit limited in what kinds of effects it can do, I feel like it works really well for my programmer brain. For example, the way that everything that is a number is something that you can animate in a consistent way. That's exactly how I like software to work. Alright, we should be at about 15 to 20 minutes now. This should be the right time to wrap up this video. But we have one final question from YouTube user Elasar108. They ask, in German, why in English? So maybe my accent comes through a bit less when I'm reading a script like right now, but obviously I'm a native German speaker. And I think the best way to describe myself is accidentally bilingual. I grew up in a pure German household and community, but then I learned to code, and basically all programming languages are based on English. My workplace is an international corporation, so all the meetings and documents are in English. Developer tools are often poorly translated, so I set my PC to English. Then because of that, I started playing games in English. Then because of that, when I started streaming, I did so in English. And that led into these videos here. So this will continue to be an English-speaking channel. Thank you for watching and for all your support. Join me next time as I continue on my endeavor to play Satisfactory at absolute maximum efficiency.